Welcome to Dr Joe Unplugged. This podcast contains general information and is not in any way medical advice. All right, today it's my very great pleasure to have on the show George Helou, who is the co-founder of Verve Education and founder of EP7. George, I've known for a number of years. Welcome to the program.
Thanks, Joe. It's a pleasure to be here. You know, I've become a fan already with your Next Level podcast in my car, Spotify, listening to the wisdom. I'm loving it, and it's good to be here.
Thank you for that. Now, we first met, might be 15 years ago.
Yeah.
You were running a chili eating contest.
Yes, one of my hobbies on the side.
which I was asked to come and sort of be a judge and medical supervisor.
Yes.
It was a long it was a fair
Which
time
was a weird
ago.
way to meet me because you're thinking, what is this guy about? Like, first impressions, you know.
And look, we do share a love of chilies,
Yeah.
but and you and we touched at the start as your two main roles. But tell us a little bit about, for listeners and viewers who may not know you or be familiar with you, a little bit about your background and how you've come to be doing what you're doing at present.
Yeah, look, from a young age, I kind of felt like you had to get the most out of life, and it was all about knowledge, learning, and applying yourself. And I was raised with discipline to push and have a good work ethic, but I had no idea about how much I didn't know, and about my paradigm that gave me blind spots. And so when I was reading self-help books and having good mentors, they really shocked me because I realized there was so much of the way I looked at things that gave me a disadvantage. And so that kind of infused that bug in me to never let that be an ongoing problem. Like, I need to apply myself to challenge the way I see things. And I think people like Stephen Covey with 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, because his introduction really talked about paradigms, and I'm here like a young kid, 19, going, what the? Like, this is freaky.
They don't teach you that stuff in school, do
They don't. And strangely, critical thinking, you have to understand paradigms, bias, all that, confirmation bias. And yeah, you're right. It's not really something that is instilled in our upbringing.
Almost the opposite. We're sort of trained and taught to regurgitate and not be questioning of current wisdom, in inverted commas, wisdom, which often isn't, and paradigms. So really, you're saying there that you learnt what was important was, what do they say? You don't know the unknown unknown.
Yeah. Because that's
so where did that lead you? The quest for the unknown unknowns.
It led me to be curious and really look into things that I was not normally, accustomed to and familiar with. It just gave me an appetite to want to know how people think, want to know all the experts, what they achieved, what made them achieve what they did, because I knew that I could learn a lot and it would blow open my cobwebs and blind spots, just to see more, because I was ambitious. Right. I did want more out of life, and then so one thing leads to another, and before you know it, I'm seeing things differently. My confidence is growing. I'm becoming more resilient, and therefore I'm succeeding in my career, and I'm loving that. So there's momentum building. But then I noticed that I had a way of communicating these concepts to my loved ones, friends, associates, and then that started to organically build. Before you knew it, I found myself coaching for free for a while because I just loved it and loved to see people also experience what I experienced, which is all these aha moments where it was right in front of you all along and your brain wasn't letting you see it. And then now you see it, you can't unsee it. It's a special thing to help people achieve for themselves like I did for me.
Right. So initially you were doing this a little bit effectively on the side.
Yeah.
You sort of, in inverted commas, had, don't want to use the word epiphany, but you'd decided
it was that though.
Okay, so we'll call it an epiphany. That and I really, you're so correct. We need to be curious Because as soon as we're not curious, it's assuming that everything that we know is all there is to be known. As soon as we cannot be questioning, and we've seen that in a number of areas in society at the moment, it assumes, well, we know everything. Well, if we reckon we knew everything so many thousand years ago, we'd still be living in caves. So you started doing it a little bit on the side, and then I remember us sitting at a coffee shop probably more than a decade ago.
Florian.
Yeah. And at that point...
White plastic chairs, round table.
Yeah, I don't think it's... That area is now it's now a fruit and veg shop, so it's sort of morphed itself, but that's all good. And you were telling me about EP7.
Yes, and that would have been just as it happened.
Just as it was getting started.
Because I was excited to share with you, there was a situation where Stephen Covey, of many people, helped me appreciate principle-centered leadership. And so he would introduce you to 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, one of his books, and you understood that each habit was really about a principle of how to prioritize, how to be, right? So I understood that to be principled is to get balanced and get more effective, right? So that was planted in my mind, and I always aspired to what other principles are relevant in any challenge, any context. Then there was process. And I really got to appreciate that there's an order of how you go about something. Understand first, then seek to come up with a solution.
It's like putting the horse in front of the car, as it were. Yeah.
So process was always critical, along with the framework of principles that gave that purpose the credibility and the depth of wisdom to power it, right? So because of that, I was always tinkering with it. And then one day... Many years had gone by, and this guy says to me, a marketing genius, local, he said, George, where does everything come from that you do when you're coaching people? Because I like what you do. I like how you position everything. But if you picture a web, if everything, like the books you're writing, the courses you're developing, what is the center that feeds it all? And then when he said that, I had my next eureka moment that I was overdue.
Another epiphany.
Yeah, I was overdue to reveal that. And then, so I ran to Next Generation Gym at the time, sat with my blank computer document screen, and I knew it was coming out because I felt it. I felt, and so you know what it was, Joe? And it was this. I had already been frustrated with knowing better. So, you know, when you go on a journey of, I want more knowledge, and you learn a lot? What about when you learn a lot, but you're not applying enough of it? That's so frustrating. And I got sick of spending over $150,000 by that point, traveling to America 14 times in 4 years, like being a personal development junkie, right?
Yeah.
But what was happening was I was just collecting information that was exciting about how to be more empowered and how to, achieve a better life. But it wasn't calibrating into my identity at the level of my excitement of what I was learning.
Really, that goes to the very old, I think it's a Zen Buddhist saying, to know and not to do is not yet to know. So really what you're saying is you knew all this. And this sort of, when you mentioned...
What's the point of being teased,
when you mentioned the gym, I remember some coffee meetings there in those days. And I think... at that point, you were sort of going under the brand of the Mind Power Coach with that little blue brain symbol.
Yes.
So really what we're saying there is it's one thing to have learnt information, and yes, I understand this information, but unless I'm incorporating it into what I do, it's just another fact that's sitting in my memory somewhere.
Yeah, and but it's not treated like a fact to the brain. The brain won't put it into the...
Well, just another piece of information, perhaps more correctly.
But what it is, it's like it could be true, but it might not be. So we're not going to trade on it for now. That's what the brain does. The brain can amass incredible knowledge as philosophy, but not as truth. And so what was that journey to convert the philosophy into truth? And truth being that the brain goes, oh, this is absolute. I need to calibrate this in the way I interpret my environment and decode the signals of my environment. and therefore, otherwise I'll be harmed, disadvantaged, right?
It's almost existential.
It really is. And so you have to consolidate that into a level of relevance where the brain gets shocked into taking it seriously. And then it will do all your heavy lifting for you. It's like when you learn to drive and you're consciously forcing yourself to do everything, and your brain goes, this is a lot of patterns here that you're repeating. Must be true. It must. You must be in an environment where this is really important because you keep doing it. So we'll take it over for you, you know? Right. And especially when you almost have a near miss and you almost die in a car, your brain goes, whoops, there's some serious harm there. We better calibrate that skill to do it for you, you know?
At some point, it necessarily has to integrate. It's like you can't learn to swim by reading a book. You actually have to jump into the water and start moving your arms and legs. And then there is a point where you don't actually have to think about the movements.
Exactly.
You're doing the movements without thinking about them. Is that really what you're talking about in integrating these ideas?
Yeah, both. When you're learning things that need to coordinate brain wiring, to coordinate the body into good skills, techniques, habits to swim and all that, definitely you need to help the brain understand what your body's doing and what it's doing wrong in a rapid succession of trial error for it to correct, refine, and therefore it can have mastery over how the body needs to be to walk, which is really falling forward, and to swim and all that. But also at the same time, there's a lot of knowledge around identity, around your relationship with your body, about your worldview of what world you think you're in. That level of knowledge is critical for your well-being and for your self-worth, for you tapping into your adaptive nature and your true power to achieve whatever you want. So there's a lot of knowledge that doesn't get calibrated, that leaves you feeling too insecure and too doubting of your adaptive nature to learn more quickly and back yourself. Instead, we get lumped into a static way of identifying with ourselves where we either will feel like we should be something good enough already and we deny our dynamic nature. And so this is where my passion really kicked off when I started to see these patterns of what keeps that philosophy flowing through and calibrating was we actually lost our adaptive nature, which is the conveyor belt for that philosophy to come and become a part of the form of our function, you know? Yeah. And so when I sat at that computer with the blank document, knowing this was about to come out, the intention for me was this. What is the process of me learning something that I know is true, makes sense, it's verifiable with principles and facts, that I know that the world would be horrible without that truth? What is the process of that becoming a part of me where I live its value in my actions? When have I done it? And what stops me from doing it? And that was the intention. And then EP7 came out. And when EP7 came out, 4 steps in, I knew where it was going, got too excited, had to stop. Took 2 days to come off the clouds to finish it because I knew that I wasn't coming up with something that was an opinion of a process or a framework, because it was all designed to reverse engineer into already everybody follows these processes and principles when they're at their best, and they don't when they're at their worst.
So this is learning how people who have been successful and how everyone defines that. It doesn't
and how
have
we
to be
all fail.
Yeah, and it doesn't have to be in career. It can be in raising their family. It can be in charity work. It can be in sports. It doesn't matter.
Truly universal.
But essentially, it is about them embodying and being true to their values and their purpose. And for those who aren't familiar, EP7 stands for Empowered for Purpose 7, and there are 7 steps. In that.
There's actually 8, but we'll cover that for a second. Okay. The hidden 8th step is to pay it forward. And I deliberately removed that 8th step because I know most people get too distracted with what they're learning to preach it to others and help others before they've calibrated enough of it into themselves. And so it was better to remove the 8th step and be all in on yourself with these 7 steps and then instinctively flow into that 8th step for others.
I mean, I very often use the analogy of on a plane, if oxygen is required, fit your own mask before helping other people, which is really what you're saying. If you haven't sorted,
100%.
really, if you haven't got your own oxygen flowing, then you can't really be of assistance to other people. It's not that you don't want to help them, you do, but there's a step, and in this instance, 7 steps before that.
And also, it's a lot more persuasive, influential when you are authentic through the lived experience of what you're sharing versus sharing with someone because you just love the philosophy. People feel how authentic and how credible the points you're making are when you have already lived them and you're coming from that lived experience.
Oh, look, purpose is an aspect of life that isn't often talked about. Martin Seligman, I think from the University of Pennsylvania, defined authentic happiness, I think this was many years ago, as fun, challenge and purpose, which was saying you've got to be enjoying what you're doing. It should present a little bit of a challenge, so it stretches you, causes you to have to go a little bit beyond what you've done previously, but also that you feel that there is some reason for doing it. And again, that doesn't have to be world-changing. It can be changing a kid's diaper. There is purpose to that. And there might be a bit of challenge depending upon the circumstances as well. And my book many years ago on DIY health, the 8th pillar of health, was fun and purpose. That's saying, well, we're going to be healthy, we need to be enjoying our lives, but it's very deep-seated in human beings that we want to be fulfilling something we feel is worthwhile. So tell us a little bit about how EP7 helps people to unlock or discover, because it's all innate. We might not have it, but innate what our purpose is, and then start to, I suppose, live our purpose or work towards living our purpose in life.
Well, it is a big one. And a lot of the things that came through EP7 over time, there was a lot of things that were starting to distill and make themselves obvious, because when you're taking so many clients through these processes, you're seeing what it's doing and you're starting to see patterns that take shape. And one of those was the definition of purpose. And so purpose is not something you find, it's something you create. Because when you look at the definition of purpose, there has to be meaning in it.
And meaning to you as an individual, be different for different people.
Yeah, exactly. It has to be meaningful to you. And what makes it meaningful makes us then look under the hood, and we find that anything that has a sustainable value exchange becomes meaningful. And so I love these infinity symbol, because who you choose to be will create an opposite equal reaction that then comes back to you. So if you are of value to someone else, what is supposed to happen, but not necessarily happens, is that they're supposed to be inspired into reciprocation to return the favor and give you value back. And so...
But that can also be karmic in that you do something good and then something good comes to you, not necessarily directly from that exchange.
Yeah. And so if you look at nature, all organisms are in sustainable value exchanges. And the moment they slip out of sustainable value exchanges, they actually die or they become extinct. The whole point is that an organism needs to be sustained with enough value from its environment to continue to grow, procreate, and, evolve.
So if a lion eats all the zebras, it'll eventually starve itself.
Yeah, and so that's why we know that nature is a balancing act. And so sustainable value exchanges is our quest to evolve into balance wherever that balance is challenged. So then when you bring that back to us, right, we have the first relationship with ourselves. So a lot of what you share is about how are we treating our bodies? How balanced are we in terms of what we eat, our exercise, our movement? Because our body needs oxygen, good breathing. It needs to be edified with the building blocks so that it can repair and detox and flow. And so our sustainable value exchange of how we treat our own bodies is fundamental as a responsibility, but also our identity. So in other words, how do you relate to who you are, how valuable you are, how much you deserve respect, how much you should expect that this world will include your dreams. Because if you have an identity that it tricks you into imposter syndrome, or that this world is so ugly, everyone just wants a piece of you and doesn't want to honor reciprocation, then that identity is not in a sustainable value exchange. You're not allowing yourself to be in a world where you're included. You're in a fight instead, and now it's all primal.
It's also at times self-propelling. It's like you buy a red car and then you see lots of red cars on the world. So if you think the world is a terrible place, you'll see lots of terrible things. Not saying they're not there, but does that become partly self-propelling?
100% self-fulfilling prophecy. So what happens is that the brain doesn't notice how complicit it is in how it chooses to be, that therefore attracts blowback. So I'll give you an example. If I've been traumatized from a heartbreak and therefore I find it hard to trust the loyalty of a partner, I will then become a little bit too obsessive around being controlling. Who's texting you there? And therefore, this person starts to feel like they are not a nice person in your eyes because you.
And you'll put your own interpretation on those as well, which may be incorrect.
Yeah, so then they start to feel stroppy. They can't even tell you they spoke to an old friend just because they are the opposite sex and they're a threat to you. So now you might actually keep information from them, and now you're going to catch them with evidence that they are betraying you, and you knew it, and now you're treating them like they're a cheating fool.
You've brought it all about, and that reinforces that you were right in the first place.
And so you drive them out of your life, and then you're left. We're holding on to this idea that, no, they did you wrong, you didn't do anything wrong.
And that pattern can be repeated.
Oh my gosh, that pattern happens in so many contexts every day, which is why that infinity symbol is so precious to me, is that how you choose to be will cause the opposite equal reaction of a reality bubble that you live in, which means you are literally living the external world of the relationship you have with yourself, right? So then when we talk about purpose, it's about, well,
this is the idea of people being mirrors of ourselves too.
Yes, the mirroring, exactly. And so when you talk about creating purpose, it's like, well, where is that creative artist in you that weaves the values that are precious in you, that your heart says, I want these values in the relationship I have with my body, with who I believe I am, with the partner that I want to have a life partnership with. Where are those values being woven in? And what ideas are you weaving into how you treat your partner and how you treat your friends in your social gatherings? There is a lot more creativity in how purpose functions than there is finding a career that fulfills you automatically because it was the right career. It made you realize it fulfills you, and now you're excited. I found my purpose. That is not fair for people to put all this onus that they got to go hunting, finding the magic silver bullet of what will fulfill them, because then they rob their personal agency, which has a dimension of creativity, a dimension of intuition, a dimension of critical thinking, to really deeply understand the world and know how to be something that creates a beautiful, sustainable value exchange with that world.
And ultimately, and our mutual friend Tom Shioyo was a podcast, Keeping It Real, has also touched on this at various times, that if you're not true to yourself and to your values and to your purpose, he's described as almost like being in prison. That, yes, you go through day to day, but you don't really have that sense of freedom or enjoyment about life. So do you find, I mean, first of all, I assume that people's purpose is sort of innate. They might suppress it. Like sometimes, 4 or 5-year-old might say, I want to be a ballet dancer or a pianist or an astronaut, whatever it might be, and has this real drive. And I'm not saying everybody can do everything that they dream of, but then get told, no, you can't do that, and end up suppressing it. But maybe underneath that, there is some pointer to what purpose is. And once that purpose is unlocked, or not so much discovered, because it's in there, how does that then how does that then flow through people's lives?
Yeah.
From what you've seen.
It's so common that we don't represent ourselves well. Because we're constantly fighting our subconscious trying to protect us by constantly being triggered by threats as a priority. And that can fill the space too much. So how can we get to our values when our brain is constantly prioritizing potential threats?
And that's a really interesting point too, that increasingly the powers that be in society spend a lot of time and effort trying to frighten the population.
Because it works, because the brain's primal first to keep you alive.
And if you're frightened, then you're less likely to have the brain space to be questioning or to want to do other things, and I suppose particularly be questioning of the powers that be.
Yeah, so when you're in too much fear and you're overwhelmed, you will look for the closest thing that looks smarter than you to defer your personal agency over to, hoping that that is your last ditch to get out of the dilemma. And unfortunately, too many predatory systems exist where they lull you in with fear to then cash in on that, and it's not a conspiracy theory like they banter. It really is simple.
Yeah.
It's in nature, there are predators, and that each predator has its predator. And so it's just the food chain. It's just the way it works.
Yep.
Now, there are clever organisms that learn how to flank and be of service to a predator. So the predator's crumbs are its sustenance.
It's like vultures, I suppose.
Yes. and also, for example, sharks have those fish that swim underneath them.
Yes.
And they get all the servings all the scraps. And I think that, they're clever. Flanking.
Yeah.
But you could see that every organism is finding a way to not be eaten and to get its feed.
Yeah.
Right? Now, we are made of flesh and bone in these avatar suits. So we're subjected to the same primal urges and forces as everybody else in the, animal kingdom and species around us. So it would make sense for us to appreciate that dilemma and to factor it into how to manage our primal urges, our primal fears, and to just be wary and balanced around. There's a lot of love, a lot of opportunity, a lot of abundance to create amazing things in this life. But there's also predatory people, and stealth are the smartest because stealth is the greatest way to, be a predator. And there are predatory systems so that it automates it. And it's normal. It's not a big deal. And you know what I believe, Joe? I believe that when you are in your flow and you back your personal agency to understand your environment and allow yourself to feel what's going on, like your intuition, and just open up with your humility to the ideas to serve you, I believe that you can bypass predatory forces on your pinky when you're in that flow.
Yeah.
So life is not that ugly when you come home into the real you.
And when we're in fear, we're more in our sort of ancient or reptilian brain.
Yeah.
So we're not, I suppose, thinking about solutions. We're just we're in a reactive rather than a responsive mode. And you're right. We do need to keep our wits about us. But if we are permanently in fear, then we're going to look to something or someone as protector. And I think we've seen quite a bit of that in society, particularly in the early part of this decade. We won't get that. We'll get banned forever. We can't talk about the thing, at least not in that sense. But part of that, and this is the E in EP7, is being empowered, which is saying, well, look, I might need some input or support from others and maybe from some structures, but ultimately I can essentially run my own life rather than needing them to do everything for me. I think people are often encouraged to feel that they don't have any power or control over their life and only the other can do it for them.
Yeah. And so it comes back to balance. So I love the collective, synergistic power and harmony of a society that can aspire to ideals and achieve great things. I also know that the individuals within that society, just like a tree can express upward, the roots have to express deeply downwards, that the counterbalance to support that society is strong constitution of the individuals. So the microcosm of an individual must be given the same nourishment and support as the macrocosm of the collective. And so what ends up happening in our society is one will push too far one way and the other will push too far the other way. And then you got this division and so that's why you've got America is I'm sorry, I'm going to say this, a shit show when you watch the way these guys lead. It really is bizarre that
I don't think it's just America.
No, it's not just America. For sure, it's not just America. But I honestly think that we as humans have to learn to consolidate the wisdom of both and to really love
What's the yin and the yang, or the masculine and the feminine?
It is. And I honestly don't think we're doing a very good job of it. I don't think we're doing a good job of it. And I think that there are too many powerful forces that can too easily leverage the weakness of one too much in its extreme.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Yes.
So this can demonize that extreme with validation, because in its extreme it starts to get treacherous. And this can legitimately demonize the other side with extreme. Yeah. And so therefore, where are we going with that?
Human history's shown it's always you can consolidate your power by targeting the other.
Yeah.
And that other, I mean, that's what wars are always fought over, against the other, and variably for land or control, by demonizing them. We've got to fight against them because they're evil, they don't agree with us, they worship a different god, whatever it might be. There's always some reason. And I mean, that's basically as it was in the book 1984, but it goes back to Roman and ancient Greek and probably before that.
But Joe, can I just quickly say, when you were talking before about how stress kind of really does keep us in that primal way to operate. The thing with protectionism, which is the whole point of high stress, to really protect you from a threat, is that it's a disconnected state, because that is the legitimate function to protect you.
Yes.
You must disconnect from the external world where the threat's coming from. So you will tense up, you will literally evade and push back, push it away. That disconnected state kills the conduit of understanding your environment fully and you being of value to it. So that whole sustainable value exchange completely gets trashed, undermined when we're in high stress.
So that makes step one, recognising that we're in this stressful state. So my view is that a lot of people that get so used to being in that permanent fight or flight that it's so normal in inverted commas that there's not even a concept that they might be in this state, and that's not necessarily how it has to be.
So we recently put together an emotional intelligence workshop, and we took a deep dive into emotions. And what you'll find that because we've normalized high stress so much, these covert emotions are our ability to cope. So we become apathetic, we numb, we become in denial because it's too much to tolerate that level of fear and stress. So we are then perpetually disengaged because we're too exhausted, and it's a self-preservation mechanism. To me, that is the hardest thing to deal with. And the only way we can deal with it is by coming to terms with who we really are and reclaiming our work in progress identity. Because if we don't give ourselves permission to be wrong and to stop demonizing ourselves if we make mistakes and in that way, we're no longer disconnecting from ourselves to learn about where we're at and what we need to go with. There is as much civil war in each individual as there is in the macro dysfunction in countries and between each other and within countries. Why? Because we simply are trained to doubt even our own goodness and intentions. And we think we need to be perfect to be loved, to be accepted. And we're expecting the world to claw into us and punish us for not measuring up into perfection already.
And it's also, there's a lot of money being made by marketers and advertisers in convincing us that if we only, it's almost like that old Rolling Stones song, he can't be a man because he doesn't smoke the same cigarettes as me, and his shirts aren't as white. So there's always something they can sell you because you're not quite right, you're not quite perfect. But if you wear this shirt or, drink this particular brand or, I don't know, some other sort of clothes, or go to, our gym versus their gym, then all's well with the world.
I know, and it's easier to get distracted into the materialism of how to present yourself to be accepted than it is to deep dive into who you really think you are.
All of that is
external.
Yourself. All of that is external. It's not internal.
Exactly.
It's being who you are as an individual.
But it's a convenient distraction, and the brain's willing to go there because it hurts too much to comprehend that maybe, just maybe, I'm making things worse in the way I'm interpreting my environment and the way I treat myself. Maybe I need to change first. And so 22,000 coaching hours, probably more 24,000 by now, has taught me that if I can get people to just be a work in progress as their primary goal, everything else gets easy after that because they restore their adaptive nature. They restore their self-worth where it should be, and that is rock-solid foundation to build a great life on top of that.
Adaptive, if I've done it this way, it's led me to this point. And there's nothing wrong with that because I wouldn't be at this point if I hadn't. But I don't want to continue in this same way. So adaptive means I'm going to need to make some changes. It's not about right or wrong other than what is right for me and what is right for me at this particular point in time. And another 1 or 2 or 3 years later, again, correct me if I'm wrong, George, that adaptive nature, then I will adapt again as situations and circumstances change and as I change as an individual.
Exactly. In workshops, we'll give 4 years with Rio Tinto, we give everybody plasticine, right? Mm-hmm. So we get them to play with this plasticine, and then we say, okay, are you that which can be any shape or the shape you've just created in the plasticine? And so everyone agrees that we are not the shape, the beliefs we have, because they can be changed. We're not, even our genetics, as we've talked many times, regulates to help you adapt and be something that can deal with nature and viruses and all sorts of things. So our genetics is regulating all the time. Every part of you is dynamic.
Yes.
And which means you are more that which can be the form for function to enjoy and experience in anything that interests you than you are the form. But our brain gets tricked into thinking we are the form, and then it defends the form to the death.
Yeah.
And that's where we get into trouble.
Yeah. Are there any key points that you haven't made that you want to touch on?
Okay, the last thing we could do is when we shift and we start to get results, just appreciate the consolidating the wobble, and that the brain needs time to calibrate the habit of becoming that person, and that you could fall back, and that's normal, and not to be too hard on yourself, because then you could reinforce that part of you.
So as a person does go through change, that very, very early time, or those first few steps, like a baby takes some steps, they're likely to fall over. That's not pleasant, but it's quite normal. It's how they learn the balance, and eventually they're able to walk without falling over. We all might fall over occasionally.
Yeah.
How is it for people when they're in those early stages of change? I assume there's considerable potential to revert to old patterns.
Yeah. So, Joe, you were the MC at a book launch of Cinderella's Secrets.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, I'm glad you remembered it. Good to see you taking
It must be about 8 or 9 years ago.
That was 2015, right?
9, there we go.
Now, the reason why I rewrote Cinderella and showed that she was powerful and the magic flowed through her is because at 12 o'clock, when she went to the ball, she was triggered back into doubting her worth. And suddenly, the constitution of self-worth that made her believe she belonged at the ball started to fall apart.
Yeah, she was the same person. She had some fancy clothes, but she was the same person.
Exactly. And it's very normal to glimpse a new way to be, get excited about it, start collecting the experiences of that new timeline reality, but then that part of you hasn't finished with the other reality being something that really isn't true anymore. So the brain goes, well, hang on a minute, this is a nice reality and we're enjoying it and we could see that there's a lot of merit in it, but we're not going to let go of that old way just in case we end up in that ugly world that we've got collective experiences, because we've also ignored how complicit we are in being stuck on that timeline. And anyway, so what happens is that you'll glimpse, you'll fall back, and then the important thing when you fall back is please do not give yourself a hard time. It is normal. Yeah. It is normal. But what you do, just like Cinderella had a slipper that she took back with her into the old world, you have incredible evidence.
She can't unsee the ball.
Exactly. You have incredible evidence that the way you chose to be and how you believe in yourself and backed yourself allowed you to get there, right? So hold on to that and finish with the old legacy of assumptions that keeps you from that world. And so I call that the wobble, like you'll wobble in and out. Yeah. And eventually you consolidate the wobble into permanent change. And that's the true outcomes we want.
Exactly. You can slip up, you can have a bad day, tomorrow's a new day.
And it can happen a few times.
Yes.
If
in fact, I suspect it's likely to happen.
It's a wobble. So just be patient in the process and believe, like a seesaw, keep loading the new way to be, keep unloading the old way to be, and eventually that seesaw is going to go bang and keep you that way ongoing.
Going forward. George, we haven't gotten around to the AI, and that means we're going to have to get together again on a separate podcast for part 2 or section 2. Thank you so much for your time and coming on the program today.
My pleasure, Joe. Thank you for having me. It's been great chatting with you.
Thanks for listening to Dr. Joe Unplugged. If you enjoyed this podcast, please subscribe, like, and share. You can also follow it on all the socials. There'll be new content uploaded each week.